Canada just handed Donald Trump the keys to the country on a maple syrup platter. Instead of rebuilding a cooperative and fruitful relationship with our neighbors to the north, Canada opted to become our 51st state instead. And lucky for them, America is in the mood to oblige their offer.
The progress that we have made in the partnership sets us up well for the new world order.
Happening now, a wave of confusion and intense discussion is spreading across North America after claims began circulating that Canada is seeking closer political integration with the United States, including talk that has been framed by some commentators as a push to become a new U.S. state. The story has moved fast, stirred strong reactions online, and raised serious questions about sovereignty, economics, and regional stability. First, it is important to clarify the confirmed facts. There has been no official announcement from Canada requesting statehood within the United States. No formal proposal has been submitted, no parliamentary vote has taken place, and no constitutional process has begun. Canadian law sets very strict requirements for any change to national status, and none of those steps have been activated. U.S. law is equally clear that adding a state would require congressional approval and a complex legal process. What has happened instead is a series of political comments, policy debates, and economic discussions that some media outlets have dramatically interpreted. In recent weeks, Canada has faced economic pressure from trade disputes, supply chain disruptions, and shifting global alliances. At the same time, the United States has been reassessing its relationships with key partners amid growing competition over energy, manufacturing, and defense cooperation. Against this backdrop, Canadian officials have publicly discussed the need for deeper economic cooperation with the United States. These discussions have focused on trade access, energy security, border efficiency, and defense coordination. In some political commentary spaces, especially online, these remarks were exaggerated into claims of a desire for statehood. The United States reacted quickly to the viral narrative. Officials clarified that no such request had been received and emphasized respect for Canada's independence. However, the speed at which the story spread shows how sensitive the current moment is. Even unverified interpretations can trigger market reactions, diplomatic questions, and public anxiety. Analysts warn that this situation highlights how economic stress can fuel extreme speculation. Canada's economy is deeply connected to the United States through trade, investment, and shared infrastructure. When tensions rise, people sometimes jump to dramatic conclusions about long-term outcomes. This does not mean those outcomes are realistic, but it does show how fragile confidence can be. Canada remains a sovereign country with its own laws, institutions, and identity. Public opinion surveys over many decades have shown strong support for independence, even while favoring close cooperation with the United States. Cultural, legal, and political differences remain significant, and there is no widespread movement calling for statehood. Still, the conversation itself is revealing. It reflects pressure points in the current North American relationship. Rising costs, border delays, and trade uncertainty have led businesses and workers on both sides to question whether existing agreements are strong enough. When systems feel unstable, people search for radical solutions, even if those solutions are unlikely. From the U.S. perspective, the idea of absorbing another large country raises enormous logistical and political challenges. Representation, taxation, legal systems, and regional balance would all be affected. Analysts warn that even discussing such a scenario casually can distract from more realistic policy solutions. The economic angle is especially important. Canada supplies critical resources to the United States, including energy, minerals, and agricultural products. The two economies are integrated in ways unmatched by most international partnerships. When trade flows are disrupted, the effects are felt immediately in factories, farms, and households. This could mean that recent statements about closer integration are less about politics and more about economic survival. Strengthening supply chains, reducing tariffs, and ensuring stable cross-border movement are practical goals. They do not require changes to national borders, but they do require trust and coordination. Defense cooperation also plays a role. Canada and the United States already share one of the world's closest defense partnerships. Joint monitoring, shared intelligence, and coordinated responses are routine. Discussions about expanding this cooperation can easily be misinterpreted by outside observers unfamiliar with how long-standing these arrangements are. Social media has amplified the confusion. Short clips and headlines often remove context, turning cautious policy language into sensational claims. Once these claims gain traction, they can influence public perception even after being corrected. Analysts warn that this environment makes careful communication more important than ever. For citizens in both countries, the story has triggered mixed emotions. Some express concern about national identity and independence. Others focus on practical worries like jobs, prices, and economic stability. The gap between online narratives and official reality has rarely felt wider. The implications go beyond North America. Allies and competitors are watching closely. Any sign of instability or misunderstanding between Canada and the United States can affect global markets and diplomatic calculations. Even rumors can influence negotiations elsewhere. This could mean that both countries will become more cautious in how they frame cooperation going forward. Clear language, transparent goals, and firm respect for sovereignty may be emphasized to prevent future misinterpretation. At the same time, the episode shows how interconnected the two nations are. When one faces pressure, the other feels it. This interdependence is a strength, but it also requires careful management. Analysts warn that neglecting public communication can turn cooperation into controversy. There is also a domestic political dimension. In times of uncertainty, bold claims gain attention. Calm explanations often struggle to compete. This dynamic can distort public understanding and make constructive dialogue harder. Despite the noise, the fundamentals remain unchanged. Canada is not seeking to become part of the United States. The United States is not preparing to absorb a neighboring country. What is happening is a stress test of a deeply intertwined relationship under global economic strain. The focus now is likely to return to practical issues: trade terms, energy pricing, border efficiency, and industrial cooperation. These are complex challenges, but they are solvable within existing frameworks. Extreme narratives may fade as facts reassert themselves. Still, the speed and intensity of this episode should not be ignored. It reveals how quickly uncertainty can spread and how easily serious topics can be misunderstood. This could mean that future debates about cooperation will need clearer boundaries and stronger public engagement. As markets stabilize and officials restate their positions, attention will turn to lessons learned. How can misinformation be countered more effectively? How can cooperation be discussed without triggering alarm? And how can economic pressure be addressed without fueling unrealistic speculation? The relationship between Canada and the United States has weathered many challenges over generations. It has adapted through negotiation rather than transformation. That history suggests resilience, even in moments of confusion. As this story continues to unfold and clarity replaces speculation, one thoughtful question remains for viewers. In an age of rapid information and rising uncertainty, how can neighboring countries deepen cooperation without losing trust or distorting reality in the public eye? The conversation has now moved from shock and speculation into a deeper examination of why such a narrative gained traction so quickly. Even without any formal request or legal action, the idea alone exposed stress points that exist beneath the surface of the Canada-United States relationship. These stress points are not about borders, but about economics, identity, and uncertainty in a changing world. At the heart of the issue is economic pressure. Canada has faced rising costs tied to global energy shifts, supply chain disruptions, and reduced predictability in export markets. The United States at the same time has been dealing with inflation concerns, energy price swings, and competition for strategic resources. When too deeply connected economies experience stress simultaneously, even routine cooperation can be misread as dependency. Analysts warn that economic anxiety often produces exaggerated narratives. When people worry about jobs, prices, and stability, they become more receptive to dramatic explanations. In this case, calls for deeper integration were transformed into claims of political surrender. This transformation did not come from official channels, but from the speed and distortion of modern information systems. Canada's internal debate has been largely about protecting national interests while staying competitive. Officials have spoken openly about safeguarding access to U.S. markets, maintaining favorable trade conditions, and ensuring energy exports remain reliable. None of this requires changes to sovereignty. However, in a tense environment, nuance is often lost. The United States has its own internal pressures shaping perception. Many communities rely on Canadian energy, minerals, and agricultural products. When supply feels uncertain or negotiations become tense, fears grow. This could mean that even friendly discussions are viewed through a lens of vulnerability rather than partnership. The viral spread of the statehood narrative also reflects a deeper issue, a lack of public understanding about how complex political systems actually function. Becoming part of another country is not a symbolic gesture. It involves constitutional amendments, legal harmonization, and public approval on an enormous scale. Analysts warn that ignoring these realities allows misinformation to flourish. Cultural identity plays a major role as well. Canada has built a distinct national identity shaped by its own history, legal traditions, and social values. While similarities with the United States are undeniable, differences matter deeply to citizens. Any suggestion of losing that identity, even hypothetically, triggers strong reactions. In the United States, the idea of adding such a large and diverse population raises questions about political balance, representation, and governance. These are not minor considerations. They affect elections, legislation, and long-term policy direction. This could mean that even entertaining the idea publicly creates more confusion than benefit. The business community has responded with caution. Investors and corporations prefer stability and predictability. When headlines imply radical political change, even if inaccurate, markets can hesitate. Cross-border investment decisions may be delayed and expansion plans reconsidered. Analysts warn that perception alone can influence economic behavior. Trade negotiations are another area affected by perception. Canada and the United States frequently revisit trade terms to adapt to changing conditions. These talks are normal and necessary. However, when framed as desperation or surrender, they lose legitimacy in the public eye. This could mean negotiators face unnecessary resistance. At home, media responsibility has come under scrutiny. Sensational headlines attract attention, but they also amplify misunderstanding. Once a dramatic narrative takes hold, corrections often reach fewer people than the original claim. This imbalance allows confusion to persist longer than facts. The role of social platforms cannot be ignored. Algorithms favor emotionally charged content. A claim about a country giving up sovereignty spreads faster than a careful explanation of trade policy. Analysts warn that this dynamic will continue unless audiences become more critical of sources. International observers are also watching closely. Allies and competitors alike assess stability through signals, not just statements. Even rumors can influence how countries are perceived on the global stage. This could mean diplomatic relationships are subtly affected by narratives that are not grounded in reality. Canada's long-term strategy remains focused on diversification, not absorption. Expanding trade with multiple partners reduces risk. Strengthening ties with the United States remains central but not exclusive. This balanced approach is common among mid-sized economies navigating global competition. For the United States, maintaining strong relations with neighbors supports economic and security goals. Stability along borders enables focus on broader global challenges. Analysts warn that unnecessary friction, even rhetorical, weakens that advantage. Public trust is another casualty of misinformation. When people feel misled or confused, confidence in institutions declines. Restoring trust requires transparency, repetition of facts, and patience. This could mean officials need to communicate more clearly and more often, even when there is nothing new to announce. Education plays a role here as well. Understanding how governments function, how treaties work, and how sovereignty is protected can reduce susceptibility to extreme claims. Analysts warn that without this foundation, societies remain vulnerable to recurring cycles of panic and correction. The episode also highlights how language matters. Words like integration, alignment, or cooperation carry technical meanings in policy circles but emotional weight in public discourse. Choosing language carefully can prevent misinterpretation. Economic integration itself is not new. Canada and the United States already share one of the most integrated trading relationships in the world. Goods cross the border multiple times during production. This reality often feels invisible until something disrupts it. When disruption occurs, people seek explanations that match the scale of their anxiety. A sudden price increase or supply delay can feel existential. This could mean that dramatic narratives serve as emotional outlets rather than rational assessments. Looking ahead, both countries are likely to reinforce messages about sovereignty and partnership simultaneously. Emphasizing mutual benefit without implying dependence will be key. Analysts warn that failure to strike this balance invites future misunderstanding. The long-term implication may be a renewed focus on communication strategy. Governments cannot assume facts speak for themselves in a fast-moving media environment. Silence can be filled with speculation within hours. Citizens, too, play a role. consuming information critically, checking sources, and resisting sensationalism helps. Stabilize public discourse. This could mean slowing down reactions in favor of understanding. Despite the noise, cooperation continues at practical levels. Trade flows persist, defense coordination remains intact, and diplomatic channels are open. These realities matter more than viral claims. The episode may eventually fade, but its lessons remain. It shows how economic stress, rapid information, and emotional narratives can collide. It also shows the resilience of institutions when facts are reaffirmed. As clarity continues to replace speculation, attention returns to real challenges: managing trade fairly, ensuring energy stability, and maintaining trust between neighbors. And as viewers reflect on how quickly a rumor became a headline, one final question stands out. In a world where stories travel faster than facts, how can societies protect reasoned understanding without sacrificing open debate?